Thanks a lot. And I just want to thank Dr. Fan and IFPRI for hosting a great discussion, and to Dr. Zhao, who I met several years ago in Myanmar, and for all the great work that you and CASD has been doing to really build more inclusive agricultural growth throughout Myanmar. So thank you. So my name is Justin Finnegan. I work at USAID for Feed the Future. And for those of you who may not know, Feed the Future is the US government's hunger and food security initiative. And we are delighted, just to upfront say that on July 20th, President Obama signed the Global Food Security Act, which was a strongly bipartisan authorization, the largest development authorization in over 10 years since PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. And what this does is it indicates the U.S. government's continued support for global food security and fighting poverty, hunger, and malnutrition throughout the world. And this is now no longer a presidential initiative, but really it's owned by Congress, and so will transfer over for many years to come. So we're very delighted, and I think it's extremely important for our U.S. government support to Myanmar, and as well as especially to supporting inclusive agricultural growth, really with a focus on smallholders, women, and small and medium enterprises. And so we at USAID have really worked hard to find the most strategic and important interventions within Myanmar's policy environment to support agricultural growth. I think one of the key things that we really realize, and Myanmar has been a great partner, and this government in particular has been a great partner in realizing that the political economy of most of the reforms in agriculture actually don't necessarily exist in agriculture or within the agricultural ministry itself. It's a very holistic reform process that must take place. And Myanmar government and people like Dr. Zhao have really been focusing on this. And so thinking about what policies that we really focus on reforming, what will have the biggest catalytic impact. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that, and then a little bit about what you said about foreign direct investment. My background is I previously to joining the government, I co-founded and ran a agribusiness in Asia, smallholder base, and it's now the largest employer in the country of Bhutan. And my business partners are running it now, but we looked for years when I was on the private side at investing in smallholder agriculture in Myanmar and within the region. So now putting on my Feed the Future and government hat, which is a very different hat, I often, when I visit Myanmar, try and really look at, okay, what are the interventions that you can really help invest in getting inclusive growth, broad-based inclusive growth throughout agriculture. And there's enormous opportunity, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that in addition to rubber, but many other opportunities. First of all, we talk a little bit about the policy environment in Myanmar. There's no doubt there's enormous barriers to achieving broad-based agricultural growth, including infrastructure, access to finance, and improved extension and production. But many of the interventions are really outside of the realm of the ag ministry itself. And so some of the policies that USAID has been focusing on, which might not seem right away directly linked, actually have quite a profound impact on many of the things that we are trying to achieve. And so some of them are the modernizing food law is something that we've been working on, thinking about bringing food technology, everything from production technology into food technology into Myanmar in a more effective way. The IPR laws that you mentioned, that's something that we've supported extremely closely. One, to help with accession to different trade laws. You mentioned GSP and TRIPS, and the U.S. government is looking at all the eligibility requirements per procedure and moving forward with the eligibility process. And I don't have any news on that, but we understand that's a big desire for the country and something that we are as USAID trying to invest in some of the interventions that will help with that if it does, when it does happen, if it does happen. One of the other areas we focus on is metrology, right? Standards. It sounds very basic, but when you actually if you're measuring bushels or measuring, what's the term for rice? Tin, right? Tin. It's not based necessarily on weight or kilograms. So when you're trying to actually connect that with different financial interventions or banking or other things without having actually a standard metric with which you can measure, it creates enormous issues. We're also focusing a lot on quality infrastructure, accreditation of bureaus and labs to do testing for things that will be required for export in the future. We're working with customs, helping improve customs and trade, interregional trade within Myanmar, and capacity building on many issues. Apart from some of the policy issues, we also work on microcredit, which we think is one of the biggest barriers in Myanmar, is that access to finance is very difficult for any smallholders or small and medium enterprises. And without that capital to grow, you'll never see that change that everyone's trying to succeed. So really tweaking all of these policies have such an impact on farmers and businesses in the agriculture food chain. I just want to mention a couple things on the foreign investment and other investment. Some of the most amazing things, I was in Myanmar not long ago, some of the most amazing things I've seen is the growth in the purchase and the sales of combine harvesters and four-wheeled tractors. In 3 years alone, there were almost no purchases of these equipment, back in 2010. And over the last 3 years, we've seen in and around Myanmar, Yangon and the rural areas, that something, I think it's 50% of all equipment sales are combine harvesters and four-wheel tractors. And what does that mean? It's not just big farmers who have their own fields and they're using them to harvest rice or whatnot. They're driving up all of the country. I was in one village outside Yangon. They were on the phone trying to book 10 hours away places where they could provide services to farmers who said, if you can actually help me harvest my rice sooner, then I can go and help and invest in other crops and work in this. And it's just creating this catalytic sort of achievement going forward. Pulses, you mentioned pulses. I was in Saskatchewan, Canada 2 weeks ago, and they have been saying that land prices have been doubling and tripling over the past few years because they're selling so many pulses to India. And Myanmar is maybe the second or third largest pulse producer in the world, and with very low production and technology on field, and also with not many sophisticated trading mechanisms. Little tweaks and focus on that will have an enormous benefit on hundreds of thousands of farmers. These are all sort of opportunities. And then the other thing is fruits and vegetables. There's an enormous opportunity to take some of the labor. There's many Thai manufacturing facilities, food bottling, fruits or pickling or other types of exports that because of prices in Thailand, they're not as competitive. It's a middle income country. So many of the labor in these processing facilities are actually from Myanmar, and they actually are very well trained. It's not very hard to envision in the next 2 years or even sooner investors in Myanmar actually building processing plants for certain types of locally grown vegetables and fruits, rubber, other areas, and taking advantage of the free trade they have in Europe and being able to lower the cost, but also bring over migrants who left Myanmar many years ago, who then become the managers and the people who actually then train the local people in Myanmar who aren't currently trained on many of these processes. These are all opportunities that will catalytically grow and show so much benefit throughout the entire country. So I'll just end with saying that there is no doubt that Myanmar has tremendous opportunity. Last week I went to La Colombe, the coffee roaster. It was the first export of specialty coffee from Myanmar. You could not hold people out the doors. Whole Foods, all the buyers have gone on and see that there's an enormous opportunity. So investments flowing in, production facilities are getting new equipment. They're looping in and training smallholder farmers to provide higher quality coffee. these are just little interventions, but within Myanmar, there's so much opportunity, and it will grow into one of the largest, I have no doubt, one of the largest and most successful agricultural production centers of Asia. And I think that, we need to be very focused on continuing the policy reforms holistically that will enable this growth, but also the investments and smart investments on training, skills capacity, and working on export and trade. So with that, I'll stop. Thank you very much.